You were never meant to blend in. You were born to shake the ground you walk on. If you've ever wondered why certain people seem to come for you unprovoked, why their energy shifts the moment you step into your power, it's because you carry something they can't imitate. You're not average. You disrupt comfort zones just by existing. And deep down, they know it. That's why the hate feels personal. It is personal. It's not about what you did, it's about who you are. You remind them of what they've buried in themselves: potential, power, purpose. So no, you're not being too much. You're being exactly enough to trigger what's fake and fragile in others. They didn't expect you to keep rising. They didn't expect your silence to echo louder than their noise. And now they're scrambling because they picked the wrong one to try and break. This journey you're on, it's not about proving them wrong. It's about remembering who you are. So walk with your head high, not because you're trying to be seen, but because you're finally seeing yourself. This isn't just survival. This is your rise. And trust me, they're watching because they know what's coming. Let's begin. Don't just watch, be part of the journey. Hit subscribe now and step into your purpose. The best is yet to come. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. That's not just scripture, that's a blueprint. See, when God builds something, He builds it to last. And you, beloved, weren't built in the spotlight. You were built in the wilderness. You were shaped in quiet places where no one was clapping, where no one saw the struggle. But heaven was watching the whole time. You're like a house planted on rock, not sand. So when the wind came, and oh, it came, it didn't blow you over. It just proved your foundation. They looked at you and saw stillness, and thought that meant weakness. But still, waters run deep. You ever see an oak tree in a storm? It doesn't shout, it doesn't flail, it just stands, because the roots are planted. That's you. They mistook your silence for surrender, not knowing that your quiet wasn't emptiness. It was preparation. You were listening, watching, discerning. And baby, when God's hand is on you, stillness is never stagnation. It's strategy. They came for you thinking you were soft ground, not knowing you were sacred territory. They launched their usual little games, trying to rattle you with whispers and shade. But when they didn't get the reaction they wanted, confusion set in. That's when it shifted, because people who traffic in manipulation panic when their tactics don't work. And now, they're shook. Not because you fought back, but because you didn't. You stood still. You stood tall. And that terrified them. What they didn't know is that you've been fortified by fire. You've been held together by grace in the midnight hour. They never saw the nights you cried and got up anyway, the times you poured into others with an empty cup, the seasons where you built yourself from the rubble. No blueprint, no applause, just grit and God. That's why they couldn't break you. They thought they picked an easy target, but what they did was awaken a storm-proof vessel. You were chosen for this. And baby, chosen doesn't mean protected from the fire. It means you survive it. You don't crumble, you rise, you don't fold, you focus. And now they have to watch you flourish in the very places they tried to bury you. So keep standing, keep shining. They didn't know who they were messing with, but now they're starting to find out. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Matthew 5:14. That's not just a verse, that's an identity. See, when the light shows up, it doesn't have to do anything. It just is. And by simply existing, it reveals what the dark tried to hide. That's what happens when someone walks into a room carrying the weight of authenticity. People who've spent their lives behind curtains start to sweat under the exposure. You didn't ask for the spotlight. You didn't chase attention. But there's something about realness that shines even when it stays quiet. And that quietness, that's what unnerves them. Because it's not silence of confusion. It's the silence of someone who knows who they are and doesn't need to prove it. You showed up whole in a room full of performances, and suddenly the stage didn't feel so safe anymore. Their applause didn't land the same. Their personas felt paper thin. And the worst part? You didn't even try to challenge them. You just were. People who build identities on approval can't stand the presence of someone who doesn't need it. And when that kind of presence steps in, it doesn't have to expose anyone. They expose themselves. The air gets thick. The glances get sharp. The commentary starts flowing. But it's not about you. It's about the mirror you unintentionally held up. Because when someone grounded in truth enters a space, those clinging to illusion start grasping for cover. They analyze, they copy, they twist. Not because they understand you, but because they don't understand themselves. And in trying to bring you down, what they're really trying to do is bury the reminder that they were meant for more. They want to drag your clarity into their confusion, not to harm you, but to justify staying small. Because your courage to stand bare, unmasked, unfiltered, is a sermon they weren't ready to hear. But here's the truth. You were never there to expose them. You were just being faithful to who you are. Still, the light in you stirred something they could no longer suppress. And whether they admit it or not, the discomfort they feel has nothing to do with your presence and everything to do with their potential still locked inside. You didn't cause their crisis. You just walked in, carrying the truth they've been trying to avoid. They pretend not to notice, yet their every action betrays a fixation they can't shake. Though their words are laced with dismissal, their behavior says otherwise. Monitoring, critiquing, mimicking. It's not affection, but it dances dangerously close to reverence. They orbit around you like satellites, unable to pull away even as they claim to resent your light. There's a peculiar energy in their obsession, a need to analyze, to measure, to react, not to understand, but to feel superior. But if they truly felt above you, they wouldn't feel compelled to stay so involved. Their resentment is just the wrapping paper. What it hides is fascination. They wouldn't echo your voice, mirror your actions, or shadow your path if you meant nothing. They're not inspired, they're haunted. And in their attempt to bury you beneath their bitterness, they unintentionally elevate you. Because scrutiny is attention, and attention is power. While they hover in a cycle of imitation and resistance, you continue your quiet ascent, unshaken, unbothered. They think they're tearing you down, but all they're doing is broadcasting your relevance, unable to look away, even as they insist you don't matter. They move in clusters, clinging to each other like drifting leaves caught in the same current. Their collective noise creates the illusion of weight, but it's hollow, just echoes bouncing off fragile egos. Unity born from shared insecurity has no backbone. One-on-one, they wouldn't last a breath in the silence of true confrontation, but together, they find courage in their echo chamber. It's not loyalty, it's mutual dependence, the kind forged in fear, not conviction. They repeat the same half-truths, hoping repetition will make them real. But volume isn't strength, and crowds don't create conviction. Meanwhile, you stand with a presence that doesn't need amplification. Influence isn't loud, it's steady, undeniable, the kind that makes an impact without fanfare. They huddle, needing each other to feel seen. You move forward, unseen yet unforgettable. Because the kind of force that leaves a mark doesn't announce itself, it just exists, unshakable. When the noise fades and the crowd disperses, what remains is not how many stood together, but who stood strong without anyone at all. He prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Now that's not just a promise, that's a posture. That's what happens when favor walks into the fire and doesn't flinch. See, when you've been built by battles, silence isn't retreat, it's revelation. Some of y'all have been sitting still, not because you were scared, but because you were watching, waiting, letting them show their hand. And baby, they played themselves. They misjudged you, plain and simple. Took one look at your calm and thought it meant surrender. Thought your peace meant you were passive. But what they didn't realize is that stillness is a weapon in the hands of the wise. You weren't avoiding the fight. You were outgrowing the battlefield. They thought you'd break under pressure, but all they did was press the wrong button and unlock something they couldn't control. They called it weakness, but it was strategy. They called it fear, but it was focus. They used to count on chaos. That's where they thrive. Gossip, manipulation, distraction. But this time, the silence didn't crack. You didn't give them the performance they wanted. No tantrum, no tears, no retaliation. Just quiet endurance that made their noise sound smaller by the day. They expected a reaction. What they got was revelation. They were never the threat. They were just loud. Now the ground beneath them is shifting. The stories they spun, losing traction. The roles they thought they controlled, reversing. Because strength doesn't need applause, and real resilience doesn't throw a parade. It outlasts. What started as an attack turned into exposure. They thought they were poking at a soft target, but they ran into a fortress. Not built of bricks, but built in seasons of hidden survival, tears behind closed doors, and quiet nights when quitting looked easier. But you didn't, and that's why it's unraveling for them. Not because you fought back, but because you didn't need to. Your stability was the answer. Your refusal to descend to their level was the victory. They brought noise, but you brought substance. They underestimated the God in you, the battles that refined you, the peace that roots you. They tried to dismantle you, but ended up revealing how fragile they really are. And now, you don't even have to move. Just sit at the table that was prepared for you, and let the results speak. Don't just watch, be part of the journey. Hit subscribe now and step into your purpose. The best is yet to come. They try to cloak their bitterness in clever attacks, but every move they make simply unveils what they've tried so hard to bury. Each jab, each whisper, each smug attempt at sabotage doesn't tarnish the one they're aimed at. It stains the hands that throw them. While they imagine themselves as strategic puppeteers pulling strings, they're only tightening the noose around their own image. Malice, when repeated enough, ceases to look calculated and starts to look desperate. People begin to notice the patterns, the fixation, the effort, the energy wasted. It becomes impossible to ignore who's truly consumed by negativity. Their obsession paints them louder than their words ever could. Instead of dismantling the person they target, they strip away the mask they wear in public. The act collapses. The audience sees through it. Questions arise, and none of the answers serve them. Why the constant animosity? Why the relentless noise? And most importantly, why such an emotional investment in someone they claim not to care about? What was meant to be a takedown turns into a confession. While they burn themselves out trying to twist the story, the one they aim to ruin just keeps moving, untouched, unmoved. The real exposure wasn't of flaws, It was of their own shadows, cast long and obvious in the very light they tried to extinguish. They aren't bothered by your presence. They're unsettled by what it represents. It's not that you did something to them. It's that you stand for everything they've failed to manufacture. The posture, the magnetism, the way rooms adjust when you walk in. It haunts them, not because it harms them, but because they can't recreate it. They study it, mimic the surface, echo the rhythm, yet the melody always falls flat. Because what they lack can't be borrowed, it has to be built, and they skipped that part. Their resentment isn't about your achievements. It's rooted in the fact that you wear your truth like second skin, while they are buried beneath masks that never quite fit. Watching you exist, without needing to try, makes their own forced performances unbearable. They're not inspired, they're infuriated. They don't want to walk their own path. They want to trespass on yours, hoping to steal fragments of your essence and stitch together a version of themselves that finally feels whole. But imitation has its limits. And when they realize they can't replicate the substance beneath your shine, the envy curdles. They lash out not to hurt you, but to silence the reminder of everything they aren't willing to become. In the end, the conflict isn't between two people. It's between who they pretend to be and who they wish they were. They operate from a place of anxiety, not dominance. The facade of control they wear is stitched together by panic, the dread that you'll outshine them, that their grip on influence is slipping, that their illusions won't hold up in daylight. So they scramble behind closed doors, crafting plans, whispering strategies, trying to manufacture control over something they never truly held. But that need to manipulate is the loudest evidence of their insecurity. If strength lived in their core, they wouldn't need to bend situations or twist perceptions. They'd stand steady, unshaken, and unbothered. Instead, they obsessively invest in your downfall like it's their last hope at relevance. Their obsession betrays their fear. Instead of cultivating their own growth, they fixate on your shadow, hoping to distort it. Real confidence doesn't flinch when others rise. It doesn't rely on sabotage to feel secure. But they do, because they see you as a mirror reflecting back everything they lack. The more they try to silence you, the more obvious it becomes that they feel threatened. Power doesn't scheme. Power doesn't panic. So every desperate tactic, every attempt to stir perception, every alliance born out of fear, it all confirms the same truth. You were never under them. You were always ahead. They just couldn't admit it. They expected noise. They expected retaliation. What they didn't expect was your refusal to participate. That choice, that stillness, was the blow they never saw coming. Because silence isn't passivity, it's precision. While they tangled themselves in a net of lies, you chose not to fight chaos with more chaos. You knew something they didn't. The weight of deception eventually drags down the one who carries it. They crafted falsehoods like armor, but now the seams are tearing. They thought you'd spiral, chase every rumor, defend yourself until your spirit cracked. But you didn't. You let their story burn itself out. And slowly, eyes turned. Not toward you, but toward them. Inconsistencies grew too loud to ignore. People connected dots, questioned motives, and began to see that the real damage wasn't caused by you. It was self-inflicted. They kept fueling a narrative, but the plot collapsed under its own contradictions. And all the while, you rose, gracefully, consistently, without needing to shout or prove. They handed you the victory by underestimating the power of restraint. Because truth doesn't demand attention. It waits, and when it surfaces, It doesn't need fanfare. It just exposes everything they hoped would stay buried. They parade around in borrowed identities, convinced that illusions can outlast truth. They patch together personas like poorly stitched costumes, hoping the seams won't show. But no matter how carefully they perform, every mask begins to slip with time. Pretending takes effort, constant, draining effort, and there's only so long someone can fake before exhaustion sets in. Eventually, people notice the gaps, the parts that don't add up, the energy that doesn't match the image. And when that happens, the unraveling is rapid. False connections disintegrate, facades crumble, and the very image they worked so hard to sculpt begins to dissolve under the weight of reality. They believed they could sustain a legacy on fabrication, but time doesn't negotiate with lies. It wears them down, exposes their edges, and strips away everything that wasn't built on substance. And as that slow collapse begins, nothing external needs to intervene. Not a confrontation, not a reckoning, just the inevitability of their own performance catching up with them. Meanwhile, the one they tried to overshadow keeps moving, not with noise, but with quiet endurance. Because while they spent their time building castles in smoke, you were building something that could actually withstand the storm. Their borrowed time is nearing its end, and when the curtain falls, no one will be surprised. They'll only wonder why it took so long. Their unease isn't born from your presence. It grows from your progress. The thought that you continue to flourish despite their interference gnaws at them more than they'll ever admit. It's not your downfall they crave. It's your surrender. But the more you succeed, the louder their silence becomes, because your victories speak a language they can't translate. They told themselves that if they threw enough obstacles in your way, you'd stumble. But you didn't. You didn't just survive, you elevated. And that quiet, graceful evolution is what rattles them the most, because they need proof that their sabotage worked. They need to believe that their efforts mattered. Yet all they see is you, still climbing, still growing, still choosing joy over revenge. You were never in competition with them, but they built a whole identity around trying to beat someone who wasn't even playing their game. And now, every win you collect, every door you open, becomes a mirror they can't look away from, a reminder of what they never had the courage to pursue themselves. They didn't want to destroy you. They wanted to erase the idea that someone like you could exist at all, unshaken, unbothered, undeniable. And yet here you are, proving that no matter how much they resist, your light was never dependent on their approval. They claim you mean nothing, yet their attention never wavers. Denial is their only defense, because to admit the truth would be to confess how deeply entangled they've become in something they say they want no part of. Their fascination hides in plain sight, camouflaged by silence, masked by dismissiveness, but visible in their habits. They observe from the edges, clinging to updates they pretend not to seek. They ask without asking, mention without naming, glance without looking. And though their words try to distance them, their focus betrays them. It's not admiration they show, it's obsession, dressed in disdain. Every move you make tugs at a thread they can't untie. They try to decode your strength, analyze your grace, dissect your resilience. But what you embody can't be duplicated. It was never taught, it was born. They crave understanding, but only through a lens of competition, not growth. And the deeper they spiral into trying to figure you out, the more lost they become in their own fixation. You've become the gravity they claim to resist, but never escape. No one gives this much attention to what they truly don't care about. And yet, they orbit day after day, sustained by the very presence they wish they could erase. They weren't just hoping for your failure, they were invested in your collapse. It wasn't enough for you to stumble. They needed it to be permanent. They sought to be the fracture, the disruption, the reason you crumbled. But instead of disintegration, they're now forced to witness your transformation. They didn't predict that their pressure would be the forge, not the fire that burned you down, but the heat that reshaped you into something unshakable. Every achievement you reach is another reminder that their sabotage was powerless. Each step forward you take magnifies their irrelevance. And the cruelest part, from their perspective, is that they can't unsee you. You're not just surviving, you're blooming in places they tried to bury you. Your presence haunts them, not through noise, but by simply existing beyond their grasp. The space you occupy, the light you radiate, was never meant to shrink for anyone, and the more they tried to contain you, the more undeniable you became. They didn't just lose the battle, they lost the illusion of control. And now, the very existence they tried to erase has become a living reminder of everything they couldn't break. Don't just watch, be part of the journey. Hit subscribe now and step into your purpose. The best is yet to come. They spent their time trying to derail you, convinced that their noise could drown out your direction. What they never grasped was that your strength wasn't in confrontation, it was in consistency. While they spun webs of distraction, you laid foundations. Their anger, their envy, their attempts to discredit you were never the real conflict. They were just echoes of their own frustration, reflections of a war they were waging with themselves. You didn't rise by crushing them. You rose by refusing to stop, by showing up day after day with clarity they couldn't fake. Their energy was scattered, yours was focused. And now, the contrast is undeniable. They thought they'd be your obstacle, but became their own. The weight of pretending, the strain of scheming, the pressure of keeping up appearances, it caught up with them, as it always does. Meanwhile, you kept growing, not because you fought them, but because you never gave them the power to matter in the first place. That's what unsettles them most, that their efforts faded while you flourished. And now, all they have left is the view from behind, watching someone they once tried to erase become everything they feared, undeniable, unshakable, and completely beyond their reach. Their downfall was never dramatic. It was silent, slow, and self-inflicted. Because when you build your life on projection and falsehood, it's not a question of if it collapses, but when.